afternoon. Thank you for coming.
Yes, good to be here.
Hi, I'm Amit Bouri with the Global Impact Investing Network, and welcome to Impact Now. I'm thrilled to have Erin Harkless Moore of Pivotal Ventures as our guest today. Erin, it's such a pleasure to have you on Impact Now. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Amit, for having me. It's a real pleasure to be with you today.
Well, you have such a wealth of experience, starting off at Wall Street and now working at Pivotal, where you're focused on breakthrough innovations. I would love to hear a little bit about how you've built the strategy, the investment strategy at Pivotal, and how that was informed by all those experiences you've had along the way.
Sure. Happy to share. So Pivotal was founded in 2015 by Melinda French Gates. And our North Star is to advance women's power and influence, to have a world where women are more in control of the resources, making the decisions that impact their homes, their communities, their schools, their workplaces, and their families. And to do that, we have the strong belief that you have to use multiple levers. You cannot come to the table with just one tool to achieve social progress around the globe and advancing women's power. So we leverage philanthropy, policy and advocacy work, and again, I'm biased, I think most importantly, investment capital to advance that North Star objective. And so that's the foundation of the organization. In building our investment strategy, we looked at different tools and levers we could pull there that would have an outsized impact on advancing women's power and influence. So there are two pillars to our investment strategy. One is a portfolio of investments in NextGen, as I like to call them, fund managers. And I can talk a little bit more about why I like to use that term. And we also invest directly into companies, into early stage startups that are innovating in areas and themes like caregiving and mental health. We looked at sectors where women were disproportionately impacted and where women are held back. And that's led us to themes like the care economy, innovations around childcare, elder care, also women's health, which is a segment that is also underinvested and overlooked and has been overlooked for far too long. So we think a world where there are more diverse perspectives at the table is going to drive greater impact and progress for all of us. And that's led us, again, to building this strategy where we center perspectives that have often been ignored, both in our fund portfolio and in our direct investing strategy.
Yeah. Well, a lot of that thinking actually reminds me of something that led to the creation of the GIIN in the first place. Back then, over 15 years ago, we were seeing a lot of work to solve social problems being, driven by, of course, the role of government and the role of philanthropy, but thought that to actually truly change systems, we actually need to change the way the capital flowed. That's where impact investing kind of originally came from, was this idea of to solve the world's problems, we need to bring investments that are prioritizing positive impact to the forefront. One of the things that I really appreciate about your thinking is also just really thinking about where markets aren't reaching. Because that's a lot of, one way you can think about impact investing is actually extending the reach of markets to those sectors that have been overlooked, or those founders or fund managers. I love that you talk about this idea of next generation. And we often hear that a lot with family offices or people thinking about, or just families in general thinking about how do they invest in a way that supports future generations. But of course, generational change is in the air. It's often talked about. Talk a little bit about the language of next generation, kind of fund managers and founders, and kind of why that's so central to the way that you're thinking about shaping the future venture ecosystem.
Sure. It's so funny to me that we, as a sector or an industry, an ecosystem, venture specifically, but investments broadly, asset management, we're all about innovation in venture, but yet we're relying on the same kind of patterns and the same archetypes of success. And I firmly believe that talent doesn't come from just one place, doesn't look like one type of background or pedigree. And to meet the moment that we're in and to drive innovation that's truly inclusive, we need to have perspectives of so many different types of people at the table. And something you said too earlier really resonates, this idea of philanthropy is essential, right? It addresses market failures, but you need investment capital, you need impact investing to drive market innovations and to create those solutions, the world that we don't even know, we want to see. And so to come back to that next gen framing, language matters. It matters how you talk about these founders and these fund managers, and this idea that someone just arrived yesterday and decided to start an early stage venture firm or start a company is not necessarily the case. these folks are bringing tremendous experience, often real lived experience with the problems in the communities that they're coming from. And so just because, maybe they haven't been at another firm for a decade or have done, a certain number of deals, doesn't mean that they have a perspective that's valuable and that's something, that's worth inclusion in an investment portfolio. So that simple, sort of recasting of the language, I think, is really important, and something that, I've been trying to talk about, and our team has been, pushing forward the last several years. But it ties back to, I think, some of the foundational principles of our investment strategy, which we were talking about a bit earlier. One of those is investing early when we can. It's really hard to get that first close, right? To get that first check, whether you're a founder or you're a fund manager. And we can't always get there ourselves, but when we can, we realize what an important signal it can be to other investors to know that Pivotal does rigorous diligence, and they, are backing this team, backing this idea, backing this firm. So investing early, one, two, not needing to rely on warm intros and kind of the network. I mean, we will take warm intros all day, but we put ourselves in the spaces where these NextGen founders and fund managers are building and creating. And try and be as approachable as possible. And I think that matters in building a pipeline that reflects, again, the world and the change that we want to see. And third is just rethinking some of these truisms of investment diligence. Again, track record matters. All of these things matter, but are trying to have a holistic process that doesn't fall back on some of the unconscious biases that we all have, and just slowing down to question, why is this person not able to put, a certain commitment into the fund for the GP commit? Well, they come from a background where they haven't amassed the wealth to do that. How else are our interests aligned? So reframing the question, not lowering the bar, just reframing the question around it to try to get to a yes. So those are just some of the things that we've tried to do with our process, with our language, with how we show up in the investment ecosystem to drive real change.
Well, I think one of the things that you've talked about is about who controls capital. It's really key to shaping the future outcomes that that we're able to achieve. Can you talk a little bit? You were speaking about lived experience and how that actually shapes the types of solutions that people develop and the needs they're responding to. From your portfolio, I'm sure you have countless examples, but there are a couple that you draw upon where you can see the lived experience of a founder or a fund manager actually shapes the way they approach investments and the kinds of impact and outcomes they achieve.
I often will say, it's founder market fit or fund manager thesis fit matters, and that lived experience, the perspective you bring, what is your edge, is essential. I have so many examples, Amit.
I'm sure.
It's hard to pick. It's like saying, which of my children I love more. I love them both. I love all of our investments and all of our founders and fund managers. But I'll share two, one founder, one company, and then one fund. On the company side, we invested last year in a company called Millie. They're building a patient-centered maternal health, midwifery-led care model, pre and postpartum. Back to, though, that founder story, the CEO and one of the co-founders there, Anu Sharma, is a proven leader in healthcare. She's led companies. She's consulted in that industry for years. But what was the driving force behind her starting Millie was her own birth journey and actually what could have been a very tragic outcome for her and her family. And she saw how broken this country is in terms of caring for women through that postpartum journey, and knew that there was a better way, and built a team, is building, they're building clinics, starting on the West Coast in Oakland, California, but expanding from there, have partnerships with hospital systems that see the value and the results that they're driving, lower costs and better health outcomes for mothers. So that's impact right there. And it comes from, the experiences that Anu had and the experience that she brought to the table as a founder and as a leader. On the fund side, a recent example that closed earlier this year in our portfolio is Cherry Rock Capital, which is led by Stacy Brown Philpott. Stacy, her partner Seda Howard, both incredibly experienced operators, leaders in Silicon Valley. I often describe Stacy as like the GOAT. She was very early employee at Google, CEO of TaskRabbit. One of the best board members. When we would reference her, company leaders said Stacy was the best board member that I have ever had repeatedly. And she saw a gap from her own experience of, kind of overlooked, underrepresented founders not having access to capital at that Series A and B stage of building their business. So she built Cherry Rock to address that and closed the fund $172 million earlier this year with top LPs, Goldman Sachs, GCM Grosvenor, Pivotal Ventures, obviously, the Ford Foundation. I could name many others, but there were those of us that were there from the very early days and saw that experience that Stacy was bringing and the thesis that she had and the clarity of vision of the type of firm that she wanted to build. And that's already showing out in the impact of her winning and leading deals for some amazing companies right out the gate.
Yeah. No, it's incredibly exciting. And I think those examples really bring the work to life. And of course, you can both see the kind of impact case for each of those, but also the financial and business case for them, I think shine through really well.
Yeah. I mean, it's foundational to our strategy that, and Melinda talks about this often as well. We're doing this to make money. Returns driven, but the social impact is alongside that. You can have both. They can coexist. And I often will push back on that assertion that, well, if it's impact, then it's not commercial. No, both of those examples I gave, all of these founders and these fund managers are building firms and scaling businesses that are meeting real gaps in the market, addressing real needs, and delivering great performance as well.
Well, and one of the things I really appreciate about your approach is as you're thinking about the bigger picture and kind of how do you actually change kind of systems and inform them to be more effective. One of the things that you do is think about bringing together leaders from the corporate space, the philanthropic, the investment space, all to foster kind of better collaboration. Can you talk a little bit about how you actually think about the impact of these efforts, and of course at the GIIN and our membership and our community spend a lot of time thinking about how you measure impact and how you think about success when it comes to impact. Obviously, there's very tangible outputs and outcomes, but there's also kind of broader shifts and influence that things can have. How do you approach your thinking on how you measure your impact and how do you define success?
Yeah. Well, one, as you noted, we think it is essential to bring a diverse set of stakeholders to the table because, depending on the problem that we're trying to solve, you might need philanthropy, you might need investment, you might need government all together at different stages. And, how we're structured and designed allows us to come to the problems collaboratively. So I'm talking and working with my program colleagues, with our advocacy colleagues. We're sharing ideas, we're making introductions, all in the service of how do we go further, faster, and advancing social progress and moving things, making our communities and wellness and life better for families and for women. And again, different tools are needed at different points in time to do that. But I think kind of coming back to the other part of your question around how you measure the impact and the success, we're still on a journey, if I'm being perfectly honest, and how to do that. We have a set of indicators and KPIs that we're looking at across the organization. Different program strategies. Our investment strategy has a set of metrics and things that we're tracking. One that I'll point towards that's relevant to some of our women in tech work and obviously our venture investing is looking at the percentage of women partners, check writers, decision makers in venture capital firms here in the United States. That number was about 9% a decade ago. Now it's 18%. So we have made progress. There's growth there. Still a long way to go, though. And so we are looking very closely at how those numbers are shifting, and then what are the impacts more broadly around narrative, around culture, how people are talking about women, how they're featured. It's not just, oh, look at this woman who's raised a fund. It's like, no, it's just a good investor who's raised a fund, right? And or has had success or exited a company. And so it's those, it's being more on our front foot as well. And I'd be remiss if I didn't, shout out our communications efforts at Pivotal as well, because my colleagues that partner with us and lead that work are really pushing the content and the stories that we tell and we uplift as well. And that's an essential part of that piece and helps us, I think, to show and measure some of the engagement that we're seeing from different audiences and how some of these narratives and perceptions are changing. Because as you said earlier too, until we shift kind of how capital is allocated, we're not going to have change.
Right.
And that matters in how people perceive who belongs at these tables, who should be in these rooms.
Yeah. Well, and I think that some of your comments also build on where we start around the language and the framing. Like it's really important to both recognize, how much progress has been made, but also how many more people we need to bring along.
Yes.
And I think communications and storytelling are so key to that.
Yeah.
We often find that we have to spend a lot of time with impact investors, and there's a ton of energy and enthusiasm, but we also spend some time outside of our own ecosystem and realize how much people don't know about it and can be inspired and motivated. And we think a lot about mobilizing capital for solutions, and that ends up being a fair bit of our work as well, as how do you spread the word and bring more people in.
Yeah. Well, you all have done an excellent job of that. I think just like you said, I often worry sometimes in impact circles that we're talking too much amongst ourselves, and that's important too, right? We need to link arms. We need to push each other, continue to innovate, continue to come back to, okay, what voices are being represented? What are the problems we're trying to solve? What's working or what's not? I mean, I think, being transparent, we have moved toward this at Pivotal, but we list all of our investments on our website. So no one can say, well, what is Pivotal? What is Melinda Gates doing when it comes to her philanthropy and her investing through Pivotal? You can find that information. And I often say to people, you can hop in the pool with us. These funds, many of them are open right now and raising capital. So now that it's important. And that's great for those that have a similar thesis to us, that are looking to, advance women's power. But it's important for others to see that as well, other institutional allocators, other institutional investors. And so I agree with you. I think you have to get outside of some of that comfort zone. And you all, with your convening power and other things that the GIIN does, is essential, is an essential part of that.
Yeah. And one of the things that you've talked a lot about is like how you can invest in innovation to lead to a stronger society. And how things like really trying to make impact investments the way you do actually help contribute to more inclusive society, but also one that has just much more shared prosperity. What would you like to see from the impact investing community, or where do you think there's opportunities for impact investing to play a stronger role in helping to not only just put capital to high impact companies, but also to help build and rebuild trust in communities that have been overlooked historically by markets?
Sure. So two things on this. One, I think it matters how you build your table as impact investors. Who's on your investment committee? Who do you hire for your team, right? Are you reflecting the values that you seek to bring forward? And are you, in your diligence or your process, bringing in those voices that have long been overlooked? I'll share some examples. We've modeled some of this in our investment committee, but we had a kind of open process of sourcing some names from within our network and really pushing ourselves to not just say, well, I'm gonna go put my friend on the on the investment committee, or some of our programmatic colleagues taking a kind of kitchen cabinet or design council approach to say, as I'm building a strategy, let me not just sit in my ivory tower and think I know all the answers. Let me bring practitioners in. But we've had folks working with us to survey our partners, those that we haven't invested in, to give us feedback. Where have we gotten things wrong? What is not working with our process? Because we will miss things. We have missed things. I know, but I don't want to ever be accused of, okay, well, they didn't take the time to learn, to ask questions, and to try and bring other perspectives into the table. So I think that's really important. And I think when you do that, you can learn and surface opportunities that, again, have been overlooked. So one that we are very excited about investing in and see a huge market opportunity at Pivotal is the care economy. And when you talk about the world that we need to build towards, I think I want to see more impact investors embracing and investing in care. It's a $648 billion market. It's bigger than the pharmaceutical industry in this country. And we're all caregivers. We were chatting about our families earlier, right? We're all caregivers, whether of your kids, maybe a spouse, a parent, a neighbor. And that work it's loving work, but it's hard work. And tech, investment can make that easier. But we need to take into account the needs of those caregivers and hear from them as we're building as well. And so I think impact investors should be at those tables, along with those that are, maybe not impact focused, because that's going to create an ecosystem of companies and investors that I think will really meet this opportunity that we're seeing.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I appreciate so much about just thinking about the care economy is that it is so relatable, and it so gets to kind of those classic like kitchen table issues, things that families are contending with on a day in, day out basis. And everyone can understand that. And I think everyone has needs and can see the benefits of actually, if we were to solve for that better as an economy, it's hard to imagine what life would be like. I think it would be so much.
It would be so much better. I mean, the pandemic and COVID really shined a light on this. I know for me personally, because I went from just, working my job, running a Montessori preschool, worrying about my parents who were thousands of miles away, and are they safe and going to get a vaccine or be exposed to this virus as they're aging, et cetera. And so there was all that swirling together. And I think it did demonstrate, like you said, this is something that is impacting all of us. And I come back to, again, all of these things are too grounded in opportunities for growth and economic growth. If we can solve and provide a better care infrastructure in this country, all parents, all caregivers can perhaps make a decision to work differently, can contribute, can start that business because, okay, now I've got safe childcare for my children, and I can have more kids. I can turn all these things, which is good for our growth and our prosperity, and everyone cares about that. So I think it's right to recenter on some of those issues, but there's real impact underneath it. And like I said, I really hope more impact investors see that opportunity and continue to lean in. Yeah,
of course. Yeah, no, I think it's a great thing to highlight. And one of the things I've appreciated about just how you've been thinking about your work, whether it's in this, thinking about like your impact measurement and management, but also thinking about your process and how you actually, continue to bring more voices to the table, is just this commitment to learning. We think a lot about that as a network, as essentially we're helping to convene a community to accelerate learning, sharing of best practices and ideas and times failures or shortcomings, but really with the interest of collectively we can actually achieve much greater things if we are communicating that way. And as a final, question, I just wanted to think about if you continued down this path and you saw other people coming along, what would your vision be kind of 5-10 years down the road of, a venture and innovation ecosystem that actually, kind of led with some of the principles that you've been discussing? Like if we can dare to imagine.
If we can dare to dream, if we can dare to dream. I think about this a lot. And I do think it comes back to probably a couple of things. One, us really harnessing all the talent that's out there, all the perspectives. So seeing more progress against that stat that I quoted earlier, more women decision makers, more capital going to female founders, gender diverse teams as well. But that's just two facets of diversity I'm mentioning. Geographic diversity, folks from different experiences, veterans, those that are disabled, just bringing different perspectives that are going to solve problems in a way that, I think if we just have one narrow type of vision at the table, we're missing out on that innovation and not building for the country that we are, for the society that we are, and reflecting all of those talents and needs that are out there. So that's one piece. It's continuing just to change sort of who has access to capital, who's making the decisions about allocating the capital. One. And then two, I think, we're harnessing, I can't have a conversation and not bring up AI. But when you say 5 to 10 years, I think a lot about so much that how we work is going to change, how we communicate is going to change. And I think it's imperative for those of us, that are impact investors or just all investors to think critically about, that how we harness that technology for, again, innovation, but also not to replicate some of the same biases and, bad behaviors that exist currently, right? Like we don't want to build a new paradigm and a new system on shaky ground. So, I hope we're using our power, as a limited partner investing into funds or investing into companies to push for terms around disclosure and really, creating a system that is sort of open, but not falling prey to some mistakes there,
right.
because that technology has, huge opportunities to transform all the things that we've been talking about.
Yeah.
Caregiving, women's health, mental health, sectors and themes that we spend a lot of time on and invest around at Pivotal. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. So we really need to be thoughtful about how we leverage that. And I hope over the next 5 to 10 years, we're doing that effectively as investors and as impact investors.
Yeah. No, I think it's a great point to end on. I mean, I think we are actually seeing a lot more engagement in our community around how do we actually think about harnessing, these new technologies for the better versions of the outcomes that we could see. And I do think this is a really, I was about to say pivotal moment. I can't too much pandering.
No, it's okay.
But it's a very important moment to just, about how impact investors lean into this moment of change and disruption and really shape that future.
Build it. If we can see it, we can build it. That's what I believe.
Well, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure, and it's given me a lift to kind of hear your perspectives, and I think it'll be such a gift to all of our audience.
Oh, so thank you, Amit, for having me. It's been great to share the work that we're doing, and just appreciate our partnership with you and the GIIN and all the work you're doing as well.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.